Hey friends, it's Melvin. Thanks for tuning into this episode. Here's just a few quick things I wanted to notify you guys about before we get started. First up, very soon, new episodes will be releasing Wednesday mornings rather than Tuesday. So don't panic if you don't see a new episode on Tuesday. Just wait a little longer and you'll see it in your feed. Second, we've introduced a mailbag. Check those show notes and toward the bottom you'll see a mailbag link. You'll then be able to text us any questions you might have about movies, the movie industry, or any movie/Christian related questions you might have. Then we'll respond in a future episode, so send us your questions now. Up next, Patreon polls, which are available to Patreon supporters at the $3 tier or higher, have been updated. Supporters can now suggest films or shows to be reviewed at the end of each month. The two most liked submissions will become the options for the Patreon poll, so if you want to hear us talk about your favorite movie or show, join our Patreon and start campaigning. And lastly, whether you're a new or longtime listener, please consider writing a review or rating the Cinematic Doctrine podcast on iTunes and Spotify. Apart from financially supporting on Patreon, these are the two most helpful ways to support the show. And that's it. Enjoy the episode.
Hi, my name is Melvin, and gotta go fast! Welcome to Cinematic Doctrine, a Christian podcast service that seeks to encourage and equip Christians to engage and reform the culture of cinema. In this episode, Daniel and I will discuss Jeff Fowler's Sonic the Hedgehog. You may recall that the reason Daniel and I discussed Birds of Prey together is because Daniel reached out to me and asked, "Hey, want to do a discussion episode together?" Well, my response was, sure, but we have to talk Sonic the Hedgehog afterward. Let me tell you, this was a blast to record. Daniel and I had some very interesting thoughts regarding the debut Hollywood feature film for the Blue Blur. And it's one of the most entertaining pieces of Cinematic Doctrine media you can find. Trust me. In this discussion episode, Daniel and I share fun stories about playing the Sonic video games, our immediate and hilarious takeaways from this bizarre film and how Jim Carrey steals the show, and whether it's wise to indulge a film as nothing more than candy or background noise. In keeping with the theme of today's episodes, let's get you caught up real quick on what Sonic the Hedgehog is all about. Sonic the Hedgehog has a power. Ever since he was a kid, he's been told to keep his power and himself in secret. However, after his hideout is raided, he escapes using one of his rings to travel across worlds. In his exodus, he finds himself crash landing upon the world of Earth in a small town called Green Hills. All grown up, he's spent his life hiding among the denizens of Green Hill Zone, but the crippling loneliness of secrecy has reached his peak. And during one fateful night when his power and anxiety explodes into a region-wide EMP, he fears his secret, and worse, his mere existence in the human world has been compromised. He collects his rings and prepares to travel to a faraway land, but the overzealous Dr. Robotnik's pursuit of knowledge and power is overwhelming. And through a convoluted series of events, Sonic has to seek the help of local officer Tom Wachowski to remain hidden from Robotnik's greedy hands. Can Sonic outrun Robotnik's manic personality? Can Tom endure the endless ramblings of a talking blue hedgehog? Will Sonic overcome his crippling loneliness? Remember, it's a Sonic movie. Anything can happen. Sonic the Hedgehog is rated PG for action, some violence, rude humor, and brief mild language. The action is par for the course for PG action. It's mostly explosions with little visuals to cue any horror or destruction. The violence is also appropriately tame, although Dr. Robotnik at times feels a little extra on how he treats people. And when that's combined with the fact that he's supposed to be a comedic villain, one might feel uncomfortable with violence being portrayed for laughs. The rude humor seems to have gone almost entirely over our heads. Daniel and I both make mention that we didn't remember anything like that in the movie, and even applauded that for a children's film. However, the IMDb Parents Guide seems to tell me otherwise. There are about 3 to 4 jokes that seem to imply the lightest amount of rude humor, that I recommend you look at if you're thinking of showing young children. And the brief mild language came down to swear words being cut off. Those swear words largely being HE double hockey sticks, female dog, and a French expression that when translated apparently means darn it. But, you know, not darn. The other word. Again, this is something that Daniel and I seem to have completely missed, and both of us were fairly attentive, so take that as you will. Now, before we head into our Sonic the Hedgehog discussion, I wanted to share real quick that if you've come to enjoy Cinematic Doctrine, consider leaving a review for the podcast on your respective podcast app at the end of this episode. Unlike YouTube or Reddit, there isn't really a way to let us know how we're doing with a thumbs up or thumbs down, so the best way to leave your thoughts on the podcast is to write a review on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you listen. Apart from that, Cinematic Doctrine also has a Patreon. For those who don't know, Patreon is a website for independent content creators to raise support for their work. By creating an account on Patreon, you can select a content creator you like and support them with a monthly donation. If you enjoy Cinematic Doctrine and would like to support the show, consider donating, as it helps cover the cost of producing the podcast. And as a bonus, if you support Cinematic Doctrine for as little as $3 a month, you're opted into a once-a-month movie poll where you decide a movie we discuss or review on the podcast. There are other unique benefits that come with supporting the podcast, so be sure to check that out at patreon.com/Cinematic Doctrine. Without further ado, here's our thoughts on Sonic the Hedgehog.
By the time this is done recording, I'll probably have been awake for 24 hours. So if I'm not as lucid as I usually am, that's the reason why. So I just want to get that in the open for everyone before. And part of the reason I didn't sleep is actually because of Sonic the Hedgehog. It wasn't like haunting my dreams or something. It was more, as I've mentioned ad nauseum, I work overnights, but instead of going to get like 4 or 5 hours of sleep before work, I chose to go see Sonic the Hedgehog. I saw it with my wife and some friends. And, you know, my wife also works full-time. I work full-time, so we don't get a lot of time together. And so we had a rare evening where we both were free. And instead of going out for dinner, we went with a group of people, went to the theater, and got 2 adult tickets to see Sonic the Hedgehog, a film that features a scene where Sonic rips a big nasty fart after eating some chili dogs. So that was how we decided to spend our evening.
And flosses twice.
And he flosses twice. 2 whole times. Both times got groans from my theater. And my theater was full of children, for context. So
yeah, I saw there was a funny review that was specifically that they watched that scene where he flosses the second time, and he overheard like a 6 or 7-year-old kid go, "Why is he doing that cringe dance?"
Well, that was one of the first things my wife actually said. It was like, this movie already feels dated. Like, if you told me that an early version of the script said dabbing and they crossed it out and wrote Fortnite dance, and then because of the 3-month delay or whatever, it was like immediately like ruined its like relevancy, I would believe you.
I will say though, the saving grace, the thing that made me confident about this movie was the fact that Sonic showed up. The Sonic drawing.
That was one of the biggest pops for me of the whole movie. Was that one drawing.
I leaned over to my wife and was like, "It's Sonic."
He's here. He's blessed us with his presence.
Yeah.
That got no reaction from my theater. I was like, look, and then no one did any. I didn't out loud say, "Look, people," and try and like rally the people behind me, but it was more like, I thought that would get something, but no.
I think it was specifically for the people that know.
That's for the diehards. I see in our meticulously written show notes that there's a line about talking about our particular histories with Sonic the Hedgehog. So, I mean, what is yours? Were you guys like roommates in college or something? Were you on the same improv team together?
We grew up together.
Yeah.
I played a lot of Sonic the Hedgehog. I don't know if you have any memory of this.
Of you playing Sonic the Hedgehog?
I mean, I think I saw you out of my window once or twice. But I remember going to like department stores, and they would have those cardboard packages with five discs in them, and they would have games and stuff, and you could get like a Sonic pack, a Sega pack. And my particular favorite one was the Lego pack, which came with Lego Island and Rock Raiders. I don't know if you remember Rock Raiders, but that was like a solid game. It was made by like 6 people. I remember reading like 3 years ago, someone on Polygon made a piece where like the lost Lego game that was honestly one of the best RTS resource management games ever made.
I remember that article. I don't remember this game at all. I know we had Lego Island on like the computer at my school, actually, believe it or not.
Lego Island was great. My disc got scratched though, so whenever I would load it, it would just be a green screen with characters, and so I just couldn't play it anymore. I was so bummed about that because that was a really fun game.
Are these the packs that came with like you would get a Sonic game, and then it would also throw in like Altered Beast and then like Vector Man or something. So it was like 5 Sega games, but like Sonic was on the cover, and that was like the selling point.
It could be, because I also had a single disc that came with Sonic and then Shining Force, Vector Man 2, and a couple other games. And I played a lot of Shining Force. Yeah, I've played Sonic for a long time. And I remember playing a lot of Sonic Adventure 1 and 2.
Great games.
Yeah, it's funny. I replayed them like 2 years ago, and they're broken like mad. But the nostalgia factor is like really fun about them. And then also the Chow Gardens are the only thing that work, which makes you endure the broken levels of the game just so you can get pets to feed your Chow Gardens. And I kind of dropped off after that because like Sonic 06 was put on the 360, which I always wanted, but then like a decade later I learned it was a disaster.
Oh man.
Like I didn't know that it was so bad for a long time until I had a friend tell me about
That's
it.
shocking to me.
Yeah, I was a pretty internet centric kid, but I guess I just never learned that it was bad.
I remember the Sonic 06, like everything about that, because I was very, very plugged into gaming media at that point. For whatever reason, I watched G4 every day. I was all over websites like screwattack.com, game trailers, all that stuff. And like every bad video game reviewer on like YouTube or whatever had to cover Sonic 06. I remember every video of all the glitches. I remember Sonic like flying through textures and getting stuck and the game crashing. I remember that. And I remember thinking like that's the point that Sonic kind of died for a lot of people. That was when Sega lost its way and Sonic became a nomad in the gaming world, which then led him onto his journeys of becoming a Black Knight and a werewolf and whatever else they've been doing with Sonic in the interim.
Which is fascinating because Sonic Heroes, I believe, was right before Sonic 06.
Yes.
And Sonic Heroes was their best-selling Sonic game just ever. So I don't know what happened. It's just weird.
Sonic Heroes sold so many copies that when I was recently moving into my apartment with my wife, I found a copy of that on the PS2, and I've never bought that game. I have no idea. This is true. I found that, and I found a Mortal Kombat game that I also never bought, and it had like a $10 sticker from like a yard sale. So that Sonic Hero, like check your game old PS2 library. You might have Sonic Hero somewhere. Like that game was just, I remember that game being everywhere as well.
There are a ton of copies at my local retro game store, and I've been meaning to pick one up for the GameCube because I remember sinking a lot of time in that game, and I always wanted to finish. You know what? There was also Shadow the Hedgehog. And that was a weird game, but it was really fun. But that was like, we talk about Sonic 06 being the time it died, but like they were already losing their way.
Yeah, Shadow is kind of like the Final Fantasy VII Dirge of Cerberus of the Sonic series, where it was like a bad game that everyone was like, oh, this is kind of charming because of just how wrong an idea it is. But everyone's like, but that's a Shadow game. I'm sure they'll pick up the pieces from this and go on to make more Sonic greatness before everything just kind of fell apart. And I just want to interject for a second and be like, I know that Sonic has had a recent sort of resurgence in quality. I thought Sonic Generations is really good. I thought Sonic Colors is all right. I know the recent Sonic Mania game was very well received, although I haven't played it. So I'm aware that Sonic has recently come back, had a huge comeback. So, but there was a time between, I would say, the Sega Genesis and now where Sonic was kind of floundering in a way. His success kind of parallels where Sega was as a company, where like Sonic Adventure 1 and 2 are a good example of, this is a great game, this is a great idea, the technology is really here, but for whatever reason it just doesn't take off the way it should. Like the Dreamcast, I consider Dreamcast one of the most underrated consoles of all time, and it just failed, mostly because it didn't have a DVD player. But my thing with Sonic is that my family was always a little lower income. I wouldn't say we were at poverty level, but we definitely just didn't have the money for gaming. So for most of my life, I was always like a 1 or 2 consoles behind. So I had a Sega Genesis when everyone else had like a Nintendo 64 and a PlayStation 2. And one of the first games I bought was Sonic the Hedgehog 2, which is still one of my all-time favorite games to this day. So I do have a strong love for Sonic. It's weird because like I have played a ton of Sonic the Hedgehog games, but I've never beaten a Sonic game. I've played a lot of them for like a couple levels. Like I just played the crap out of Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine and Sonic Spinball for whatever reason. that Sonic R racing game with a legendarily horrible soundtrack.
Oh my goodness.
Can You Feel the Sunshine? Yeah. That Sonic fighting game, Sonic Shuffle, which is Sonic the Hedgehog ripoff Mario Party game, which a friend of mine swears up and down is just as good as Mario Party. It is not. So yeah, I have a strong love for Sonic, but similar to a lot of people, I also have this weird sort of fascination with Sonic because of just how strange his franchise is. Where before we did this, I didn't do a ton of prep for this, but I did out of curiosity sort of look up, because I know there's tons of bad Sonic games. There's a lot of bad Sonic the Hedgehog games. And out of curiosity, I looked at it, and like, he has whole series of games that I've never played, but they deal with him fighting like an evil wizard. Like, that game has multiple like spin-offs. There's the whole Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games. There's Sonic RPGs, more than one of them. There's a whole series of Sonic racing games. It's just weird. He's this weird franchise that's been actively on fire for about 10 years, but everyone sort of weirdly loves Sonic, so they keep expecting him to do better, and he just doesn't. So I am also digressing a bit. But yeah, I really like Sonic the Hedgehog a lot. I was a Sega Genesis kid. I did not own a Super Nintendo for my entire childhood. I owned a Sega Saturn, I owned a Sega Dreamcast, and I owned a Sega Genesis. Sonic till the end. Sonic CD is still one of my favorite Sonic games. I think that one's very underrated.
I gotta finish that one.
It's wild.
There are actually, I've started many Sonic games, but I've never perfected them, because you know how
you can speed run them and all that stuff.
Yeah, or getting the Chaos Emeralds. Some people don't think you've beaten them unless you get all the Chaos Emeralds, but it's these are
whatever
really hard. like Sonic and Knuckles trying to get all those Chaos Emeralds is just miserable. It's just miserable.
I almost beat Sonic the Hedgehog 2 without losing a single life in class at Bible college. I had a bunch of emulators on my laptop, and I was sitting in the second row, and I just, beginning of class, I opened up my laptop, started up Sonic the Hedgehog 2, and I played through all the way to the final boss battle where I finally died. And when I died, 10 people gasped behind me for 2 hours. People had just been watching me play Sonic the Hedgehog, not taking notes. And I turned around, and a bunch of people just quickly looked down at their notes. And I just stopped playing because I felt so self-conscious all of a sudden. And then 2 kids came up to me after, and they're like, "Hey, do you want to keep playing Sonic?" And we just went to their dorm room, and they watched me beat Sonic the Hedgehog 2.
It's the run.
Yeah.
He's on the run, guys. And you start passing notes. Yeah. Daniel's on the run. Watch him.
Both those guys were at my wedding. One of them was a groomsman.
Was that your icebreaker?
That was one of the first times I ever hung out with them, yeah. So that Sonic the Hedgehog really brought me together.
The whole purpose of this movie was friendship. I mean, that right there was this movie. It was friendship, man.
I'm going to go on record as saying a movie version of the story I just told, it might have been more compelling than this movie.
That's the joy of classic video games. That's why people were fascinated when Dark Souls became a hit, because it was just watching somebody play a really difficult game. It's like watching a sport. You are now part of it. And Sonic the Hedgehog is honestly a really good one for that. I mean, seeing someone try to speedrun those, because they're built for speedrunning, is always fascinating, especially when you're trying to exploit glitches and bugs rather than be completely ruined by glitches and bugs.
Well, Sonic's partially interesting, and this isn't my observation. I'm stealing this observation from Jack Packard, where he noted that Sonic is built around a single gimmick of speed, but is also every level is designed to work against you for going really fast. Or if you try to run really fast, you're going to immediately get damage. And that's one of the things that's so weird about Sonic, where it is just a platformer. It's a really good platformer. I think it stands up there with Donkey Kong Country and Mario and all that stuff. But they had to work in these gimmicky parts to sell the whole blast processing thing of the Sega Genesis. So you hit a speed thing and you go through a loop-de-loop. That's really cool, but that lasts for 10 seconds. And then the rest of it's just a standard platformer, which I don't think is a bad thing. He spun it as a bad thing of why he doesn't like Sonic the Hedgehog. I think that's part of what's so interesting about 90s platformers in general, where there are all these attempts to create new mascots to sell a game because that was the thing you did. And everyone was trying to find a gimmick. So you had Arrow the Bat and Bubsy. Good old Bubsy, or Blinks the Time Sweeper or whatever. And most of these characters were bad because they just had to like shoehorn in a gimmick. Sonic gave them a gimmick, but they were also smart enough to be like, yeah, but let's also just make a really good game that like get to use strategy and there's different ways to complete levels, which I think that's the real innovation of Sonic the Hedgehog. Is unlike like Mario Brothers where it's very linear, Sonic like rewards you for exploring and just finding weird ways to beat levels and stuff.
Yeah, I'll put on the record that my favorite platformers are probably Sonic and Kirby.
Oh, good old Kirby.
But anyways, we should probably talk about the movie.
The movie.
Yeah, the movie. So I think it goes without saying that like stories of people playing Sonic the Hedgehog or like just video games in general are usually a bit more entertaining than this particular movie. I'll start off by saying I had a good time with it. Part of that is because at some point I just sort of shut down and just enjoy what I'm watching. It's not like a bad thing. It's more like I know where I'm at when they try to be too serious and they go Final Fantasy and it turns out it's just Sonic 06.
Oh,
like
man.
It just doesn't work. And so I think like there's almost like an intense cleverness to this movie in that it doesn't go beyond, I don't know, like what it needs to be. It is both exactly what I expected while also being good for my opinion, and therefore not what I expected at all. Like I really expected this to be a disaster of a movie that would contribute to the many disasters that are Sonic the Hedgehog. But to me,
Yeah.
It was like I kind of had a good time. And I will say too, I really enjoyed that this was a children's movie with adult humor that wasn't inappropriate humor. It was clever humor. My worries were trampled during the scene. There's a scene early on where James Marsden had been trying to get a new job, and he was waiting for a letter to tell him like, hey, you got it or you didn't get it. And his wife or girlfriend, I think his girlfriend at the time, his girlfriend buys a cake, and when she opens it, it says like, screw San Francisco. And she goes, wait, that's not right, and hides it and gets out the next cake and it says, congratulations. And then she says, I never doubted you. And I was like, hey, that's really clever. Like she would, like, I don't know. To me, that was a really clever joke. Plus more cake, so I'm all down for that. To me, that put me at ease. Also seeing Sonic. I mean, both of those put me at ease. We're like, I'm going to get best of both worlds. So this hit everything I needed it to, and I'm fine that it didn't go beyond that. But I think from the notes or the lack thereof that you wrote down, you have very different thoughts of this movie.
Yeah, I wrote it's bad. It's my sole note I wrote down. Okay, like to clarify, you went in with the expectation this would be just a disaster. This movie had a very famously troubled production. But in the lead up to this movie, in addition to getting moderately positive reviews from most outlets, like, I mean, they weren't like overwhelmingly glowing positive reviews. They weren't saying like, wow, what a revelation. This is one of the best children's films ever made. They were like, it's okay. But what in retrospect is super surprising to me is I was seeing a good number of people on social media, like I was seeing a lot on Twitter. There was 80% people tweeting, oh, wow, this is actually really good for a video game movie. Wow, finally, a good video game movie. And what a great movie for the kids, whatever. And then there was like a small subsection of people that were like, everyone telling you it's a good video game movie is lying to you. This movie's bad. But then I kind of like brushed those aside. And so I think my expectations were maybe raised too much. Good for a video game movie should not be too high an expectation. Every video game movie that comes out that is like not the worst film you've seen that year gets this weird amount of like, it's good for a video game movie. And then like a couple months later, everyone's just like, wait a minute, that wasn't good. Like the same thing happened to Prince of Persia.
Oh, who remember that?
I remember that because this is this weird story. A really good friend, both these people were groomsmen in my wedding. Yes, I had a female groomsman in my wedding. They were dating at the time. They dated for like 3 weeks and it fell apart. It was a disaster relationship. I told them that would happen. Anyway, but
Doomsayer Daniel.
The guy in the relationship, who is my best friend, would just always invite me to things. He'd be like, hey man, you should come along. But he would do that on their dates. And I wouldn't know that this was happening until I got there. And I would realize it was just me and the two of them. And so one of the movies you saw was Prince of Persia. And it was one of the weirdest experiences of my life where I was just like, oh, sick. I love Jake Gyllenhaal. And I show up and it's just the two of them. And she had this like horrified look on her face. Because this was like the fifth time this has happened. And so like, I was just like, so the movie was pretty good, huh? And then they're just like, she wasn't talking. And she was just like angrily like, staring at her phone. And he was like, yeah, it was pretty good. Just completely oblivious to what was happening. Movie was okay, I guess. But yeah, so like, every new video game movie that comes out gets this weird amount of like this weird shield of criticism where, I mean, yeah, it's not great, but what do you expect? It's Doom, it's Assassin's Creed, it's whatever. But the comparison I see a lot of was Detective Pikachu. And Detective Pikachu is a movie that is not the best movie I've ever seen, but there are a lot of things about it that I admire. I admire that they just went with a gonzo weird premise. They fully embraced the potential of a video game movie. Like, you can create any world you want. You can do anything you want. And Sonic the Hedgehog has one of the strangest lores of any video game property that's ever existed. There are multiple cartoons, comics, video games that all have seemingly a completely different continuity. In one cartoon, Sonic and his group of people are a group of rebel fighters fighting like a dictatorship. Another one, he's fighting an evil wizard. And another one, he has like a romance with a human girl, which is the Sonic 06. There's all these things you could do. And what they did was they just made a Disney Channel original movie and just slapped Sonic things on it. You've already seen this movie. It is a movie of mystical creature, insert creature here, fish out of water, meets human person, teaches about friendship, roll credits. It is that movie. You have already seen this movie. There's occasionally odd Sonic references to it, and I think that was what was so incredibly disappointing, where I sat down and like Detective Pikachu is colorful, it's inventive, they do a lot of interesting things with the location, the setting, and there's also this understanding of like, okay, if I'm making a Pokemon movie, I'm not just making a movie for children, there is 20 years of Pokemon fandom that wants to be there. So we can't make a movie for adults necessarily, but we can make a movie that will like, you know, tickle the imagination of these Pokemon fans. So you get to see like beautifully rendered Pokemon in live action. It looks like they've just went out and hunted Pokemon and found them and put them in the movie. Sonic the Hedgehog has about 5 locations, I think, for the entire movie. It looks incredibly cheap. Everything other than Sonic looks like fake. It looks like a set. James Marsden's house looks barely lived in, which is something that, like, I don't know why it bothers me in movies, but like when you watch a movie and you can clearly see they just found a house and threw up 1 or 2 family photos, maybe to try and make it look like they live there. And this is going to be a taste thing. I found Sonic the Hedgehog as a character to be completely insufferable. The entire movie, he does not stop talking, and I think maybe of the roughly 500 jokes they gave him, I think maybe 10 of them landed for me that were funny, and he just is incessantly talking the entire film, which undermines what the movie is trying to do, because the idea is that James Marsden learns to love this lovable goof the whole movie. But like, I just could not believe for 1 second that people had not discovered him. There's an early gag in the movie where Sonic is supposedly like kind of like the chupacabra of this town, where nobody's found Sonic yet. But the whole movie, he's not only doing things out in the open, he's doing things that would bluntly get anyone caught. In this age of smartphones, I could not for 1 second believe that Sonic had somehow gone undercover this whole time. But that's a nitpick. But what is not a nitpick is the very basic premise of someone learning to love Sonic was completely alien to me, because for halfway through the movie, I was just kind of just rooting for Robotnik to just kill Sonic, so I would have so I could stop listening to Ben Schwartz PG riffing, where he's making like really bad pop culture references. His jokes just are all groaners.
The second act of this movie is Sonic sitting in the passenger seat of a car. I don't know why they did that. But like he can just run. Like, let him just do his thing.
Oh my gosh. Okay. I cannot, like, I must mention this. The big pivotal plot point of this movie is Sonic needs to go grab his rings, which that's clever. I mean, there are a couple of things this movie does that I thought were clever. One of them is they did a really good job of sort of integrating as much Sonic things as they could without rooting the movie they're trying to make. But one of the basic things is he needs to get to a building in San Francisco to get the rings. And for absolutely no good explained reason, rather than just handing Sonic a map or giving him his phone with GPS activated, he decides to drive Sonic there. I could not stop banging my head against the wall at that point. I was like, he runs fast. That's the whole thing. Why are we doing this? Why is it a road trip now?
Or the fact that he can run up like,
oh my gosh,
like just a wall. Like he can run up walls. Why didn't he just run to the top of the building? They have to go through it. Like I completely agree with you. I completely agree with everything you're saying, but like sitting there and just kind of being okay with it, and then also hearing like my theater was just in the movie. Like my theater was filled with laughter, and there was kids just being excited, which always just makes me happy when kids are so happy.
I will say, as soon as the movie ended, a kid next to us looked at his mom and said, "I want to watch this movie every day."
Oh,
and I was like, "Well, I'm glad he liked it." However, that same kid, at one point in the movie, early in the movie, when they're introducing Robotnik, a government guy looks at another government guy and goes, we're getting the smartest man on the case. And this kid goes, I hope it's not George Washington. Which that would have been a way better movie if they just dug up George Washington's corpse and Frankensteined him back to life to fight Sonic the Hedgehog.
Dr. Robotnik builds a Patriot from BioShock Infinite. It would be so bad. This is one weird crossover. I thought we were getting a Sega universe, not just a video game universe. That would be fascinating.
It sure would, Melvin. It sure would.
I want this movie. We had a kid that Catherine overheard say, "Mom, I want to play Sonic games now." So it's like he didn't even know who Sonic was. It was just the family outing where they're like, it's a PG movie in theaters. Let's go watch that. Which that's great.
I will say I also am glad that they didn't do the Shrek thing or Boss Baby thing or whatever where they would decide to sneak in a bunch of jokes for the adults in the audience. This is a kids film in the purest sense of this is a fully saccharine, like de-ickified movie. There, with the exception of like a few like bodily function type jokes, there's no like there's not even like PG level swearing in the movie. There's no like innuendos or like secret sex jokes in the movie. This is as like sanitized as you can get as far as family entertainment goes, which I kind of wish the movie had edge somewhere. Like even with Robotnik, well, I mean, we'll get to Robotnik in a second. I think he deserves his own little section of the review.
Absolutely.
But
absolutely.
Like there isn't like a scene where like someone makes even like a really scary threat towards Sonic other than like someone makes a comment about like studying him for science and dissecting him, which even in the context of the movie doesn't come across as very threatening. This is if you just want a movie to go with the whole family and sit down without having a single worry in the world of what kind of content will be in this movie. I know you made a reference to James Marsden living with his girlfriend, but they don't even specify if they're married or not. So they could have, for all intents and purposes, been husband and wife. I don't think they kiss even throughout the movie. They maybe held hands. This movie takes place in some sort of weird alternate reality where a alien hedgehog can show up and no one will even say a cuss word. So if that's your concern, this movie is totally fine for children of literally any age. So
you may not say a cuss word, but you will shoot him. You will fire a gun at him.
Tranquilize a dart, to be fair, but yes.
I love that was in the trailer. Like the trailer was just Sonic gets shot. Like, okay, I gotta watch this movie.
Even though he can run so fast that time itself stops, he does get shot with Tranquilize a dart by James Marsden.
Any scene in a movie or show or animated feature where a character just clumsily falls down and face plants gets an audible laugh out of me. And when Sonic is shot in the leg with a tranquilizer gun so his legs don't work and he falls off a table, you have made me one of the happiest people in a theater. I don't know why.
Comedy 101.
But there are certain things in movies that will just get me to laugh. Basically, if something obnoxiously loud happens, but it's not like obnoxious to me, it's more like obnoxious to everything else in the movie, that will just get an audible laugh out of me. I don't know. You ever like how you're in a quiet room and someone just sneezes super loud? Like that will cause me to burst into tears with laughter. I don't know why, but just the fact that everybody else is like uncomfortable and the person who sneezed is really sorry.
That's one of the 5 weirdest things I think you've done on this podcast, Melvin.
Well,
that's up there, man.
I don't know. I think it's hilarious.
I kind of understand what you're saying. Something that's so out of place that it should not be there, and that poor person has to feel the brunt of the shame of what happened.
And it's not even like appropriate shame. Like you didn't do anything wrong, you just sneezed. Like something about that just makes me laugh. I don't know, I do it sometimes. I mean, I just get sick and I sneeze and everyone's just like, dude, what the heck? I'm like, sorry, it's my body. Guess I can't control anything in my life. Like, okay.
I mean, you crossed over into current like sad meme territory that the kids are into. So
that's a good thing. It's good to be aware that you can't even control your body.
Comedy wise, this movie is completely inert. I could not stand it. I found this movie so thunderously unfunny for like the entirety of it, with the exception of Robotnik. Everything in this movie just fell so flat on its face in terms of comedy. Every once in a while, there's a watershed film. There is a movie that its ripple effects can be felt throughout the industry. When Pulp Fiction came out, Tarantino-esque films started popping up everywhere. I read articles and things where it talked about where film professors at their school, most kids' final film projects involved like some big shootout with guns, kind of like in a Tarantino movie in the years following it. And with superhero films, for example, like The Dark Knight or Iron Man really set the tone for things. For whatever reason, I feel like Deadpool / Guardians of the Galaxy created this like weird thing where now we're getting like Deadpool light in a lot of comic book films or like big adaptations of properties where like Birds of Prey had some stuff in there. Detective Pikachu is clearly kind of riffing on the Deadpool formula to the point where they essentially just got the exact same character into the movie and stuck him into Pikachu's body and sanitized them. This felt kind of like that, to the point where there's even like a completely unnecessary framing device where the movie starts off with Film School 101. I bet you're wondering how I got into the situation, freeze frame, where he just starts in the middle of an action scene, pauses, rewinds the whole movie. Sonic does not narrate anything else in the rest of the movie up until you get to that point again where he goes, now you know how we got here. And they just start the movie. It is so completely unnecessary. It boggled my mind in the theater. And it's the same thing where like let's just get a comedian and let him riff while in a cartoon character's body. And that just does not work for Sonic.
But if you're a kid, I don't know, man. This is like the perfect movie. I don't know. I just think about it in that way, and I think it worked.
I completely disagree. I completely disagree on so many fundamental levels, Melvin. And we're going to go through several of them right now.
I love it.
One of them being, I will say one thing before we I don't want to go to like a fine tooth comb dissecting all of the quote unquote plot holes and whatever in this movie. There's a level where that is unfair because this movie has almost zero ambition to the point where it's almost admirable, where there is no attempt to elevate this movie at any possible level. But Roger Ebert, a lot of reviews of children's films would often resort to one thing, which is he would say something to the effect of, especially when it was a negative review, going to the movie should be magical time. It should be this imaginative thing where you go into like this other dark room and you're ushered into this mystical other world. And to that effect, I feel like there's something kind of sad when movies, because they're aimed at children, have absolutely no ambition of whatsoever. But because the idea is, I mean, it's kids. Who cares? They're not discerning viewers. They don't understand taste. They're not going to sit there and be like, yes, this movie like invokes things from, Orson Welles and Tchaikovsky and Ingmar Bergman. They're not going to do that. They're just going to sit there. Kids will sit there and watch like YouTube videos, like just auto playing over and over again. And there's something very sad about that to me, where Sonic the Hedgehog is a property that you could do a lot of things with. And so it's so strange to me that they don't invoke anything from Sonic whatsoever, where it starts off where he's in like Sonic World and then he gets teleported to our world, and then they go on a road trip to nowhere. They go on a road trip to a single bar location and then another house location that, if you told me it was the same house set that they started the movie with, I would believe you. And then they don't do anything. It's so sad. Where I imagine if I was a kid who loved Sonic the Hedgehog video games, you told me there's a Sonic the Hedgehog movie coming out, my mind would go racing with the things that they could do. Like, oh, is he going to go to that weird factory? Is he going to turn into a werewolf? Is he going to like go to space? No, he goes nowhere. He goes to a single building set that they don't even really use. He just goes on the roof. That is so sadly unambitious. Again, compared to Detective Pikachu, they created whole worlds for that movie. They created a whole mythos and all these wonderful, colorful characters and ideas and things. Like, you could go on Netflix right now and find 5 children's shows that deal with like morally complex issues. You could turn on Dragon Prince. So they talk about like the ethics of war and revenge. You could turn on Kippo and the Age of Wonder Beast, which talk about racism. You could turn on She-Ra, which talks about like moral ambiguity and the difficulties of people separated as child soldiers. You could turn on Adventure Time. You could turn on any of these things that challenge children, give them like emotional depth and complexity. Or you could just watch Sonic, which is just nothing. There's just nothing to this movie. It's so strange. With the exception of one thing, Melvin. And that one thing is...
Well, hold up. I had 3 thoughts, and I'll keep them brief. And I just want to make clear that, like, Daniel messaged me and said, this is going to be a short episode. I got nothing to say.
I have nothing to say because it's just there's nothing to talk about, which I guess in itself is something to talk about. But we just told you the whole plot of the movie. There are other things. At one point, James Marsden is labeled an international like terrorist who's wanted by the FBI.
That was amazing.
But then, okay, so here's the one plot holy nitpicky thing that just made me audibly gasp in the theater and turn to my wife and my friends. I saw the movie with a couple people, all of whom did not like it. So the rings that Sonic needs are located at the top of a building. They go to the building, And rather than Sonic run up the side of the building, which he is fully capable of doing and does at other points in the movie, they for no reason need to go in and hide Sonic in a duffel bag and go up to the roof. Or James Marsden, because he's a cop, identifies himself and says, I am a cop. I need to go to the roof of the building. Like 20 minutes ago, they just said he's an internationally wanted terrorist. He walks in, no disguise, identifies himself with a photo ID, and no one bats an eye.
Awesome.
The entire scene doesn't need to happen. It was awesome. It leads to one of the only funny gags in the movie, which is in the trailer where like people can hear Sonic talking in a duffel bag and he claims it's a kid. That is funny, admittedly, but it makes zero sense.
It was awesome. I think this is one of the most. I think this will go down as like absurdist humor because everything is just amazing. I had 3 thoughts to what you're saying though. I thought, one, this movie was safe. It was inexpensive. They knew that one company wasn't going to do it, and then Paramount was like, okay, fine. If they're probably taking it into account, like they were worried about it, so we should be too, but let's still do it anyway. Why else would you have the same scene of James Marsden in a car with an animated creature? The second thing is, I thought this film plants some interesting lore to say, like, look, we know about Sonic, bizarre Sonic lore that makes no sense. And they're probably just going to make up their own, sort of like any other comic book movie would. But then also you're talking about like Sonic being insufferable. And that makes me think of like which Sonic, like we've talked about, like we like Sonic. And part of that is also his personality, because like in the games, he's always been kind of cool. Like I've always compared Sonic the Hedgehog with Dragon Ball. I really think like, okay, Dragon Ball is much richer. Like you get to the Super Saiyan arc, you get to Frieza. Like Frieza is one of the best arcs just ever when it comes to anime or manga or anything, but also it's just a really rich story. I don't know if people feel the same way, but like if you read the manga, like it is solid. And in this movie, they don't like Sonic isn't really cool. He's like you talking about, he's kind of a dork. And something about that was kind of fun to me, like just the whole idea of like, yeah, we were all hanging out, but like, you know, you didn't know I was there and I was just hanging around and it was all fun. Like I knew if you knew I was there, it would be even more fun, but it was also cool because you didn't. And stuff like that to me was just like perfect, because I feel like that's Sonic fans too. Like I think that this movie itself is just like so self-aware of
what a bizarre defense of the movie. I love it.
But it's so true. Like
Sonic fans would hide in the bushes and watch you as you watch TV. This is them on screen.
Absolutely. Oh, I wish I had friends. I know. I'll just get my universal remote, stand outside someone else's house and control their television.
The exact same thing is used in Daredevil season 3 for Bullseye, where like he has like an imagined friendship with somebody, but it's played where he's like a serial killer. And there's literally no difference in how both things are portrayed.
To me, that's amazing. I don't know. I walked out of the theater and I wasn't disappointed because I was confused, but the confusion leaned toward joy. There's just so much to this movie that I think you're just missing out on, primarily on its bizarre nature. It is so bizarre. I think you need to watch this and just let it pummel you into the ground and enjoy it.
Oh, I did, Melvin. I did. I was so defeated and just exacerbated by what I was seeing.
But see, defeated means you put up a fight. Don't put up a fight. You need to just take it as what it is. Build your own canon, just like Sonic games are. Sonic games make no sense, and you have to put them together in your own head. Like, that is this movie. This is almost a so bad it's good movie. Without like not being it's like it's weird, man.
It's not because it's boring. Like that's the main thing. Like I am pointing out many of the quote unquote highlights of the movie, but there are long stretches of this movie where it's just James Marsden acting with what I assume was like a puppet with like dots on it, and just being like, "Ha Sonic," while Sonic like rambles off like horrendous like open mic bombing one-liners. Like there's not enough like inspired weirdness in this movie to really push it to that level of like, this is bad, but it's bad in a way that's like interesting or enjoyable.
But even like what you just said about like you have the entire bizarre otherworldly canon of Sonic where like he could be basically Sonic Galaxy or
they could do anything,
but they just choose to have him in a grayscale cityscape. That is amazing. Like that's so funny to me. Like it's just like they don't have chaos in this movie. They don't have like the crazy intense like the ending of Sonic 2. Like they have nothing.
There's no Metal Sonic, there's no Shadow, there's no Knuckles, there's no Chows, there's no.
But they kind of do have it in that they pepper in just from the beginning and the end to the point where I'm like, okay, I'm in it. Like this was your origin story. Like I get it. Because one of the things, like, I remember when you talked about, like, Birds of Prey and you talked about DC, where, like, DC is just allergic to origin stories. Like, we're getting an origin story that came out in 2000s. Like, this is exactly what I would have expected then. And I think it worked just enough to keep me engaged.
I am not against what you're saying. I am not against the concept of we're going to soft launch a Sonic. We're not going to bog down Sonic with the baggage of just whatever is happening in the Sonic video games, comics, cartoons, whatever. I am not at all against just we're going to have Sonic, we're going to have Robotnik, and we're going to have a human character to act as the audience's surrogate to get to know Sonic. I'm not against that in the slightest. If anything, if I had to pitch a Sonic the Hedgehog movie, that would be part of my pitch. What I do not like at all, and what is the fundamental philosophical divide is there's no reason for this movie to be as bad in the ways it is. There's no reason for every line out of Sonic's stupid mouth hole to just make me want to like hang myself in the theater. There's no reason for that. There's no reason for the movie to consist of basically nothing. There's a tonal problem in the movie, and it's something you mentioned where there's these odd moments where Sonic is being annoying, possibly like not a good person. Like there's a thing in the movie where he tricks someone into thinking they're crazy because they think so, like, which maybe they like Sonic's not a good guy. Like I don't understand why people like this guy. He's kind of a menace. But then, like, it'll just stop, and then it'll just, like, Sonic will look at the screen up at the sky and go, I'm so lonely. I wish I had friends. And it's just, it makes you want to vomit.
It sounds exactly like a Sonic fan. They're manic, they're bullies, but also they're really lonely, and they don't get it.
They have this same scene multiple times where Sonic is doing something Sonic-y. Like, there's a moment where I'm like, okay, like, there's a scene where he's playing baseball, but it's just him playing all the positions. That's fun. Like, I like that. And then it just breaks down. There's a moment where, okay, there's an earlier scene in the movie where Sonic literally just out loud to the audience goes, I sure wish I had friends. I'm so lonely. I have no friends. And then they do that scene again where he's playing baseball, and it cuts to him like he hits a home run and he goes and he does the whole baseball thing, and he goes, the crowd goes wild, and he turns to the bleachers, there's no one there, and he goes, I have no friends. And my only thought was you could have done this exact same scene and it would have been a million times more effective if it was just, you didn't have the earlier scene where he goes, hey audience, I'm lonely and wish I had friends. That is my character arc. If instead of, they just cut to a scene where he's playing baseball by himself, hits the home run, goes, the crowd goes wild, and then just cuts to an empty bleachers and it cuts back to him looking like kind of sad with no dialogue. Like, that's the thing that bothers me, where you could have just you could have just edited this movie into something better. I had a thought throughout this movie where they rip off the scenes of Quicksilver from the X-Men movies where they slow down time and he runs around and like sets up shenanigans throughout the place, which I'm not saying aren't effective and they're fun. Like, those are some of the best highlights of the movie to me. But like those scenes where he's not talking and he just has like a knowing look as he like trips someone or moves something out of the way, I found Sonic more charming in those scenes. And I thought of like, what if Sonic just didn't talk? What if most of this movie was just Sonic running around doing things and just having knowing looks while other characters reacted to Sonic? I might have been able to stomach this movie a lot more.
Yeah, I think you should just rewatch it.
Dan, wait for the Criterion release of this movie with the commentary, and maybe you'll get it. I just think you didn't get it.
I think you need to watch it in a very different way. Not in a better way, just a very different way.
You should just think Sonic's good and watch it like that. I think it'll really improve the experience.
I don't know. I just think I'm at this point where I've reserved myself to that like there will never be a perfect Sonic the Hedgehog piece of media, because Sonic the Hedgehog as an icon or a product is fundamentally flawed. And what fascinates me is that despite that, like, he's flawed, it's still successful. Like, it's still a thing everybody knows. Like, there's just this weird thing where, like, just the mere idea, a hedgehog that runs at the speed of light and can't swim, to me seems like an alien product. And the fact that like Sega also just ignores everything else and is like, if we can just reboot Sonic, and then 2 years later, if we can just reboot Sonics, if we can, and then like they have tons of property. Like the movie opens up with like a Marvel style Sega thing, which is like they want to do more movies.
Yeah, what if there's an Altered Beast movie? You know, what about that?
You see like a scene from like it's like a I don't know, it's like a mural or like a collage of all of their games, and there's like a part of Yakuza in it, and I'm like, didn't expect to see that.
Yeah.
But like it just, this fascinates me. I don't know. This was like, we talked about how we're really excited to see New Mutants, and like this to me is like on par with like, I couldn't wait to see it because I knew it was going to just seem so bizarre. I knew that like they weren't going to do any of this crazy stuff because one, that costs a lot more money, and they're not trying to reach like the budget of Alita Battle Angel, and like it's just, I don't know, man. I could see myself buying this, comfortably watching it with my child or something, and like whenever, Lord willing, that happens. But like, it's just,
I will
like,
report you for child abuse, Melvin. I'm gonna call Child Protective Services.
Our kids are gonna be so fast, you'll never be able to catch up with them.
There's one thing I think we can agree on is Dr. Robotnik. He's actually emblematic of part of why I'm so fresh with this movie. Jim Carrey clearly was the only person who got the memo of, hey, I'm in a fun video game movie. What if I acted like a cartoony video game character? And man, oh man, does Jim Carrey make a meal out of like the little peanuts he's given as a character. If you told me that he didn't even read the script for the movie and just went out there, bought his own wardrobe and just did his own thing, I would believe you. I unequivocally will say that Jim Carrey's performance as Dr. Robotnik is not only the best thing about this movie, it's one of the most fun performances I've seen in any movie recently. Just in terms of like, this one man is saving this entire film. Like, every time he's on screen, the whole movie lights up for me. I don't typically take my phone out during movies. I have not once ever taken my phone out during a movie, which I'm sure people won't believe me, but that is, I don't like doing it. I think it's rude to other people, even if you're just checking the time or whatever. Please don't do that. I, however, was sitting in the very back row, so I didn't really feel bad about it. But there are points in the movie where I was actually like taking my phone out and just being like, what? Like, I just can't look at this movie anymore. This movie's horrible. But every single time Jim Carrey walked down the screen, I put my phone away and was just riveted by one of the most magical performances I've seen. Thing one I love about Dr. Robotnik, as played by Jim Carrey, the movie makes zero attempt to explain who this guy is. They just give up. There's one scene where people are like, okay, let's get Robotnik.
I loved that scene. It was like, so weird because
so
it was like
awesome.
They just have to have a reason to get him to show up. So they like, and they edit it at such a fast pace because they know all the kids in the audience will be bored by it because there's just a bunch of old men in suits, and like it was just so breakneck speed.
They're just like, but he's crazy, but his technology is far beyond. Yes, it is. This character just shows up in this movie with future tech from the year 2025 or whatever. Like, this guy is from the future. He has like drones and robots that can transform. They get blown up and they build themselves back together. He has like technology from like he went forward in time into another planet. There's no reason for him to have this tech, but he has it in this universe, and it's incredible. It's like you walked off a set of a different movie, like with a different character and power set.
It's awesome.
Yeah,
it's awesome. He is having so much fun with it, and his dance number was better than the one in Birds of Prey.
Oh my gosh, I love that song. I may be one of 10 people that knows that song, but Where Evil Grows is this underrated gem of a song. There's a great cover by a band called the Gore Girls that I've been listening to for years. It's on my Halloween playlist every year. He has this amazing villain dance number to this wonderful song called Where Evil Grows, and he's dancing. He's doing. I think he did his own choreography. It's like, that clip should have won an Oscar for something. Joaquin Phoenix should go to his house and give him Jim Carrey the Oscar that he rightly deserves for Best Actor. It's incredible. I cannot say enough good things about this performance. It might be like the whole like diamond in the rough, the one thing I like about this movie, but it cannot be overstated how fun this is.
And I can't wait to see in the sequel, because I'm pretty sure there's going to be a sequel. This movie has been very successful in its opening weekend, but I can't wait to see the next movie with his killer mustache, man. I love it. He's just gone off the rails. And I guess they're just going to skip Sonic 2, and they're going to just go right to Ann Knuckles and just be set on the Mushroom Planet, and we're gonna see the egg carrier, not the egg carrier, the what is it called? The orb, like the egg orb in Sonic 3.
I don't know.
I don't know.
Like,
There's no dialogue in those early games. You just have to put everything together yourself. But yeah, I'm all for that. That could be some cool visuals. They'll just actually get like an actual director of photography to show up and do some real stuff. Get someone to do some color grading.
Thing 2, I love about Dr. Robotnik, Melvin. Thing 2, throughout the movie, there's random bits of dialogue where Dr. Robotnik subtly builds his backstory, and he is the strangest character in any movie I've ever seen.
Yeah, I loved it.
There's a amazing joke that reveals that Dr. Robotnik was apparently abandoned as a child. He learned like great philosophy from mythical people. He speaks multiple languages. Like, it's just every scene you learn a new thing about Robotnik, and it doesn't make any sense with the rest of the things that you've told about Robotnik. And there is no attempt to make any of it gel or cohere together in a semblance of anything. He's just despicably evil. Nobody likes him. He thinks everyone's dumber than him, and he thinks he's a genius. And it's just glorious. I could not get enough of this character.
I think it's fascinating that even in him, they changed his character from what I'm typically used to in the video games. I mean, he's a pretty serious villain, and he's not making jokes, and he's not making jokes at the behest of people. He's just a egomaniac, and he builds robots, and he literally is like, I'm just gonna blow up the moon because I can. Also, yeah. I'm gonna shoot you guys with a laser. Like, he's a wicked man in the games, which is again part of like the disparity of like why this exists, is that like Sonic is like a cute character with like Tails is cute. All these characters look cute, but then they're like in this world where like there's this guy who just is animal cruelty incarnate. Like, it's just
it reeks of 90s like environmentalism.
It's bizarre.
Yeah, Robotnik is like an eco-terrorist essentially. I will give the movie credit for one thing. One of the things in the movie they set up is Sonic likes to give people dumb nicknames, none of which I thought were funny. However, it does set up him calling Robotnik Eggman.
It does.
And they gave a completely logical in-world reason for him to call Robotnik Eggman. So I'll give the movie a point for that. And there was one really funny joke that they set up and then actually paid off later with James Marsden's sister-in-law, where later in the movie it just cuts back to her and, oh yeah, we never like really rectified that thing with her. And I thought that was funny.
Thought the Olive Garden product placement was funny
sweet
too.
Mother of mercy.
I thought it was awesome when they're like, your government thanks you. And it's just like nothing, which just makes complete sense. Especially during tax return season. It's great.
Oh my gosh.
By the way, this money that you made, all the work and effort you did, here's $12. Go see a Star Wars.
Yeah.
It's like so bad.
That would sit better with me if the entire animation team that redesigned Sonic wasn't fired like right before Christmas, apparently.
I completely agree. No, they was the same. So the same team that worked, they only worked on 2 movies as far as I know, Sonic the Hedgehog and Cats. And they had to go back and redesign both movies. And that's probably why they got shut down, is because it looked bad on them to have made what they did basically for Cats and Sonic. But in reality, like, the Sonic design needed to be redesigned because some jerk was like, no, this is what Sonic needs to look like. When Sonic shouldn't have, like, you should never see Sonic's hands. You should never see Sonic's teeth look so human. Sonic should have his eyes very close together so they look like one eye. I don't know. It's just like, it was entirely someone else's fault, not the animation team. And then of course Cats is the same thing. It was entirely Tom Hooper's just ego that thought this is a good idea.
It really boggles my mind that this wasn't the original Sonic design.
Me too. I wanted to know what the original Tails design was.
That was my first thought too. I was like, they're somewhere on a hard drive. They're just a horrific looking Tails, like somewhere.
just this horrendous design. And then even they had the echidnas in the beginning too. And I was like, what did they look like? Because those look like the Sonic Adventure 1 echidnas. So I don't know.
Despite everything I've said about this movie, despite every single negative thing I said about this movie that I thought was very, very bad, I am weirdly interested in a sequel to this. Like, very strangely. Yeah.
I think because this movie sets things up and it's just basic enough to be enjoyable. I think if you can,
You're free to think that about it.
that's my review. Put that on the poster. Just basic enough to be enjoyable.
If you give up this movie,
Yeah. Oh man, I think like the tagline for Waves was like "Let it wash over you." So like, just put that on Sonic the Hedgehog. Let it wash over you. It's so
Just-
bad.
comma, let it wash over you.
Yeah, I think a sequel could be cool because of the little seeds that they plant, and they only plant them in the beginning and then the very end, and then of course mentioning like there's other worlds that if you need to transport to, you can use the rings to go to. I think that works fine enough.
Yeah, I mean, there's a Mario Brothers movie coming out, right? This by Illumination or something.
Illumination, so it probably won't be very inspired,
but
which really disappoints me.
Unlike this movie, which is just a beacon of creativity and narrative daring, but like, I would love if they cross these over. There's no reason they can't.
Why not?
There's like they set up alternate worlds. You've already opened like Pandora's box. I mean, I'm sure Sega will be like, nah, man, Alex Kidd. That's the next big franchise.
And by the way, there's absolutely no biblical application. There's nothing for us to talk
There's
about.
nothing. Yeah, because this movie has nothing in it, Melvin. There's nothing. It is. If you go right now, go to like Amazon Prime, Hulu, Netflix, just find a generic family film with an animal in it. It could be a movie or a dog learns how to like write books or something, or learns how to snowboard, and you watch that movie. It's that movie, but with a slightly higher budget. There are a couple like great action sequences. I think the scene on the highway where Sonic and James Marsden are driving a car together while trying to fight off a robot. First off, it's just the only scene with some of the jokes that I actually thought were funny. And like, there is some clever action here, but the only thing I can recommend, if you are a huge Sonic the Hedgehog fan, I think there's inherent value in watching this because, I mean, there's some fun nods to the games and stuff like that. And this isn't the worst Sonic the Hedgehog thing to exist by like a long shot.
Yeah.
There's a million other Sonic the Hedgehog things that are just bad, that are very, very bad. But I will give a mild recommendation in terms of seeing Jim Carrey's just incredible performance, Dr. Robotnik. It is something else. It is a very talented person who's just, there's no reins on him because why word the beer? This movie gave me the impression that nobody really cared much about what they were seeing, where everyone just kind of was like, yeah, we're making a dumb movie. And so Jim Carrey was just like, okay. And he just went absolutely crazy. There's also one scene with Neil McDonough, who some of you may know is Dum Dum Dugan in the MCU. He's also Damien Dark in the Arrowverse. He's also in Paul Blart 2 and other things that are good.
Paul Blart 2 and other things that are good.
Paul Blart 2 is not good. Don't misconstrue what I'm saying. He's in a single scene of this movie. That is one of the weirdest things to me, where they got like an actual actor who's in stuff, stuck him in a single scene of this movie where he goes back for Jim Carrey, gets no like lines or anything. He doesn't get like a funny dig at Jim Carrey's character, and he's just in none of the rest of the movie. I don't know what happened there.
This is before Jim Carrey uses a time machine to send him back to World War II so that he can be in Band of Brothers.
You gotta help Agent Carter. Mild recommend if you just really want to see a Sonic the Hedgehog movie. I feel like a lot of people are going to this movie because it's a meme, and I think they're gonna be disappointed by how not particularly funny it is. Like, this movie is not a funny disaster like Cats. It is just kind of, I thought my main problem with the movie is that it's just boring. There's really nothing, in my opinion, that's so bizarre and engaging that I just want to sit there and analyze the movie and see what went wrong. This felt like a very standard family film that happened to have a very famous IP and one really fun performance in it. I also don't want people to think that I'm dissing Ben Schwartz at all, who's the voice of Sonic the Hedgehog. He's great in Parks and Rec. I loved him as Rutabaga on BoJack Horseman. He's funny in lots of other things. I found him to be just completely unbearable in this.
So you would say this was a miss? Hit or a miss?
Oh, yeah. I think this is just, I think it's a disaster, but not in the fun way that some movies are disasters. But I think that won't persuade some people. There's a ton of people who have seen this and they're talking about how it's like a great family film and it's finally a good comic book movie, finally a good video game movie. I don't know what movie they saw. I guess I'm in the minority opinion on this one. This is just mediocre and boring and bad, and I don't understand why so many people seem to be embracing it for whatever reason. But I guess Jim Carrey's performance was just strong enough to overpower it. Other than a really, I don't want to throw on the word iconic performance, but just a really just wonderful scenery chewing performance from Jim Carrey.
I think it's good to reiterate the point that there isn't something like overt or really any subtext really when it comes to like anything. There's nothing.
There's
like,
nothing to talk about.
For like, so I was thinking I think it's important being a Christian movie podcast to at least mention something biblical. And this isn't really something biblical as in like, I'm going to pull from some sort of passage and be like, yeah, you know what? Sonic really makes me think of Proverbs 6:18.
It just really, the thoughts of total depravity in Sonic the Hedgehog really made me repent.
Yeah. Like there's nothing like that. But I do think there is something to say about like comfort and leisure where like you could put this on and feel comfortable with like your older kids watching it.
Yeah.
And I say that to be like, because like, I think the only thing that frightened me, I was not frightened by Sonic the Hedgehog. Let me say that. There's a scene with Robotnik where he's just like, it seemed like he was a little more mean than I was expecting him to be. And that like shocked me a little briefly. Like, and I keep describing movies as shocking me. And it almost like makes me sound like I'm some sort of baby, but like, I'm not.
Yeah, you're clutching your pearls at every film.
Yeah. Right. I'm just aware of like, how is this going to affect, like if it was to be watched by your kids, what would they think? Like there is a scene and it's funny. And let me go this way. I think this movie's funny, at least if you think of your own headcanon for a metatextual like perspective, because this is a movie where Sonic the Hedgehog sees a family have an EMP go off underneath their car, and they crash, and they're all safe. But Sonic never runs to go save them.
No,
like that's the weirdest thing. Like to me, that's amazing. And then also the fact that like in the beginning, like I just love turtles. So like the whole turtle sequence was really funny to me.
That was cute.
And so like I was just rooting for the fact that like Sonic saves a turtle and then gives him the time of his life.
Yeah,
like,
save the cat. Yeah.
So I'm just like, I love this. This makes me happy. But again, you kind of have to have like this sort of like metatextual headcanon where you're like, this movie is everything it shouldn't be. And that's why it's so good. But yeah, I mean, should we feel comfortable just like with a movie that like kind of means nothing and isn't doing anything? I mean, there is rest. I mean, if you can, Daniel probably can't rest and watch this movie. It's probably infuriating. But like for me, I could rest comfortably knowing that it's on. It could be one of those I mentioned before, like Alien vs. Predator tier movies where it's like, I'll just put this on to like kill some time. I'll do some dishes. I'll clean the house and it'll just be on. Also, I like doing that in silence, though, so I probably won't because Sonic talks way too much in this movie. Mm-hmm. But, like, I don't know. To me, I stepped away having enjoyed it. I would call it a hit. I don't think it's a miss at all. I think it's a selective film, though. Like you said, like, it could just be totally boring to you. And then Jim Carrey's on and it's a lot of fun. But I also know, like, the movie seems to be focusing on a cinematic universe for kids. And I think that's really cool. I think movies have already done that. I mean, that's like pretty much every television movie that exists is part of some sort of bigger canon, and that's a cinematic universe.
And every movie based on a true story.
Technically speaking, every movie based on a true story.
That's an interesting point.
Which one? The ironic metatextual perspective or the light leisure of it?
There's nothing wrong. There is nothing sinful about putting something on purely for the sake of like unwinding. We all have like a comfort food kind of like entertainment. And I don't think that's wrong. I'm not going to say that what your point is wrong because it's not. Like there is nothing wrong about putting something on that you can turn your brain off and relax. If anything, I think in this day and age where we're constantly plugged in and always just being bombarded by things, I think there is something to be said about having sort of an escape. My thing is just, every time I see a movie kind of like this, this is one thought of I open up my phone, I have an ongoing list of all the movies that I really need to see at some point. And it's very hard for me to quantify. Mark Maron has this running joke where he says he's getting to the age where every time someone suggests something to him, whether it's like a band, a podcast, a movie or whatever, he stops and goes, I don't have enough time left on earth to do that. Like, I'm going to die in like 20 to 30 years. Do I want to spend this time doing this? Which is like, it's a joke, but I can't help but think there is some wisdom to that where there is so many other things that you could be watching, especially in regards to children's entertainment, where I don't know if I'm necessarily like, I don't know if it's a ringing endorsement to say, well, you're not wasting your time watching this movie. So like, I think like, that's what I keep coming back to is one of the biggest issues of the movie is that there's so little of anything to it that it's hard for me to recommend it the same way I'd recommend like the burning log thing on Netflix that you have on at Christmas. Like you could put something on your TV that would make it seem like there's like I have like tinnitus, so I always need background noise. I have like a fan going a lot of the time. Like you could just do that instead of putting Sonic the Hedgehog on.
You could have tinnitus instead of watching Sonic the Hedgehog.
You could like it's so difficult. Like why don't you just start watching CSI or something, or Law and Order? There's like a billion seasons of that. Like I just don't. It's so hard for me to sit there and just be like, yeah, I guess it's better than having a TV turned off. Like it's sort of like a recommendation. I would counter your point with that concept of like wisdom. Like, what are we spending our time doing? What are we filling our brains with? I know I will, if someone ever responded to me saying like, you should watch this movie, and if they said something like, or you could pray or read your Bible, I will punch them in the face. That is a stupid thing to say for various reasons. Yes, we could watch no movies and just be like studying the Bible 18 hours a day or whatever. I'm not saying that. Like, I'm not going to Jesus juke this whole thing, but there are so many other things better for children and for you at every conceivable level than Sonic the Hedgehog. Which I know is kind of a dumb argument in some respects. I remember, actually, I was watching an old Siskel and Ebert thing where I think Gene Siskel recommended like Gamera or something like that, like give it a thumbs up. No, Roger Ebert like gave a thumbs up to like one of the Toho monster movies, and Gene Siskel was like, "There's a lot better monster movies out there," and Roger Ebert was just like, well, yeah, there's a lot of other kind of movies. Why do we recommend any movie? Why don't we just tell people to rent Citizen Kane over and over again? Which is kind of an interesting point. Like, yeah, there's always gonna be a better movie out there to watch. So, I don't know. I'm saying you're not wrong. I just vehemently disagree.
Thanks so much for tuning into this episode of Cinematic Doctrine. If you've seen Sonic the Hedgehog, what did you think of it? Do you think this was a serviceable enough movie? Or are you with Daniel and think this was an absolute waste of time? If you're listening on Cinematic Doctrine's website, let us know in the comments below, or shoot us an email to cinematicdoctrine@gmail.com. If you enjoyed this episode, consider leaving a review for the podcast on your respective podcast app at the end of this episode. Unlike YouTube or Reddit, there isn't really a way to let us know how we're doing with a thumbs up or thumbs down, so the best way to leave your thoughts on the podcast is to write a review on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you listen. And as I mentioned before, Cinematic Doctrine has a Patreon. For as little as $3 a month, you're opted into a once-a-month movie poll where you decide a movie we discuss or review on the podcast. There are other unique benefits that come with supporting the podcast, so be sure to check that out at patreon.com/Cinematic Doctrine. A special shout out to those who supported the Art House Theater tier. Thank you so much, Mom and Dad. You're the best. All of this will be available in the show notes. Until next time, stay cool.
Want some Cinematic Doctrine swag? You're in luck! We've got 3-inch Cinematic Doctrine logo stickers exclusive for Patreon supporters. Perfect for your travel mug or laptop. Head over to patreon.com/Cinematic Doctrine, link in the show notes, and choose the Independent Theater tier. Doing so will net you other perks too. But let's be real, the podcast stickers are the coolest perk. So get yourself some podcast stickers by supporting on Patreon.